Hello and welcome back. Today we're here with the renowned Dr. Dean Ornish. Thank you so much for being here with us.
It's a great pleasure.
So you're an author of 6 best-selling books, and the 7th one that is coming out is called Undo It.
Correct.
It comes out January 6th. I have 10 questions for you, but first I would love to hear about your background and struggles that led you on your path to self-healing and ultimately healing others too.
Well, let's see. Long ago in a galaxy far, far away, I was raised in Texas, and when I was a freshman in college, became profoundly and suicidally depressed, and that was really my doorway into this whole area. And having survived that, and it's a long story, and I wrote about it in a couple of my earlier books, it really was a doorway for me to understand how suffering can be a catalyst or a doorway for really transforming our lives in ways that can make it much more joyful and peaceful and happy and loving. And so when I went to medical school, I was learning how to do bypass surgery with a guy named Dr. Michael DeBakey, who was one of the pioneers of heart surgery. He basically invented bypass surgery. And we cut people open, we bypassed their clogged arteries, he'd tell them they were cured. And more often than not, they would go home and do all the things that had caused the problem in the first place. You know, eat junk food and smoke cigarettes and not manage stress, not exercise. And often their bypasses would clog up, so we'd cut them open again, sometimes 2 or 3 times. So for me, bypass surgery became a metaphor of an incomplete approach, that we were literally bypassing the problem instead of treating the underlying cause. And for many years when I've lectured, I've showed a cartoon of doctors busily mopping up the floor around a sink that's overflowing, but nobody's reaching over to turn off the faucet. And the faucet, the cause to a much larger degree than we had once realized, are the lifestyle choices that we make each day. And so our unique contribution was to show in a series of studies beginning in 1977, now over 40 years ago, that these same lifestyle changes, a whole foods plant-based diet that's low in fat and sugar, moderate exercise like walking half an hour a day, various meditation and other stress management techniques derived from like yoga and meditation, and what we call psychosocial support, which is really love and intimacy, or to reduce it even further to eat well, move more, stress less, love more. Boom, that's it. And the more diseases we study and the more underlying mechanisms we look at, the more scientific evidence we have to show how powerful these simple changes are and how quickly people can get better. You know, we tend to think of advances in medicine as being a new drug, a new laser, something really high-tech and expensive. And I think our unique contribution has been to use these very high-tech, expensive, state-of-the-art scientific measures to prove how powerful these very simple and low-tech and low-cost and often ancient interventions can be. So,
Why do you think you were so depressed and suicidal?
I was depressed and suicidal for 2 reasons. One was that I thought I was stupid, and that now that I was with a bunch of really smart people, it was just a matter of time before they figured out that the admissions committee had made a mistake in letting me in. And I went to school, Rice University in Houston, at that time had the highest suicide rate per capita of any school in the country. It wasn't in their college catalog, but I found that out later. And my roommate was one of the 4 people that year who made a perfect score on his SATs, and it is a long story.
Whoa.
But the other reason was that I had this kind of profound spiritual vision, which was more than I was ready for, which was that nothing can really bring lasting happiness. And, you know, our whole culture teaches us that, oh, if you just, you know, get more money and more power and fame and beauty and accomplishment, then you'll be happy. And I knew that wasn't true. So the combination of feeling like I was never going to amount to anything because I was stupid, and even if I did, it wouldn't matter anyway, was I thought, well, you know, like, I remember sitting in organic chemistry class one day saying, like, well, why didn't I just kill myself? And then I won't be in so much pain, you know? And then I thought, why didn't I think of that sooner? What a great idea. Like, oh, because you're stupid, you know? So I made all plans to do that. And then I was so run down after being up, because I couldn't sleep for a week straight, I was so agitated, that I got a really bad case of infectious mononucleosis, which turned out to have saved my life. And my parents kind of got wind that I wasn't doing well. They saw what a wreck I was. So I went home to Dallas to recuperate, and my plan was to get strong enough to kill myself, as crazy as that sounds.
Meanwhile, it doesn't sound crazy to me at all.
Oh, I'm glad to hear you say that. So meanwhile, my older sister had been a child of the 60s, and there was a spiritual teacher named Swami Satchidananda who'd really helped her get her life together. He was an ecumenical teacher. And so my parents, this was in 1972 in Dallas, decided to have a cocktail party for the Swami, which you can imagine was, even then that would be weird in Dallas today, but especially weird back then. And so in walks this, you know, there's an old saying that when the student is ready, the teacher appears, and that was certainly true for me. So in walks this Swami looking like Central Casting's idea of a Swami, long white beard and saffron robes and everything. And And he started out by giving a satsang, a lecture in our living room. And he started off by saying that nothing can bring you lasting happiness, which I'd already figured out, except I was like, what am I missing here? He's glowing and I'm ready to do myself in. And he went on to say what I'm sure by now sounds like a new age cliche, but it really turned my life around, which is that nothing can bring us lasting happiness. But the good news is that we have it already, and that it's our nature to be happy and peaceful unless we disturb it. And so he said, look, the point of all these different techniques like meditation and so on isn't that they bring you a sense of health and peace and well-being, that you have that already. That's our nature to be happy and peaceful, that we disturb that inner ease and we become diseased, or we are fine and we define ourselves. He liked to make puns in all these ways. In fact, the title of my new book, Undo It, because people would say, what are you, a Hindu? He'd say, no, I'm an undo, you know. And really, the idea is that by practicing these techniques, that they quiet down our mind and body enough to experience more of an inner sense of peace and joy and well-being, one that didn't come because we got something we thought we needed, but rather we simply, at least temporarily, stopped disturbing what's always there. And that's it may sound like semantics or splitting hairs, but it's a profoundly empowering realization, because if it's out there, you know, if only I had more money or more power or more sex or more beauty or more accomplishment or whatever, then I'd be happy. Then what I learned from the Swami was that however it turns out, you generally feel bad, because until you get it, you feel stress. Wow, I hope I get it. And the stakes go up because it's not just winning or losing, it's being a winner or loser. And you feel like people love winners and they hate losers. So I hope I'm a winner, you know, because I've got to get this so I can be happy and loved. So until I get it, I'm stressed. If someone else gets it, then I'm really stressed. And it really kind of reinforces that this idea that we live in a very competitive, hostile, zero-sum game, dog-eat-dog world. You know, the more you get, the less there is for me. And even if I get it, it's seductive because in the moment it's like, I got it, now I'm happy. But it doesn't usually last. It's almost inevitably followed by either, now what, it's never enough, or so what, big deal, it doesn't really provide the lasting meaning that I thought it would. And so the cycle continues. Well, this didn't do it, but maybe that would. And I remember a patient told me that the letdown that comes from accomplishing a goal is so great that I always make sure I have a dozen projects going on at the same time so I can immediately shift my attention. So, and the Swami would put it, it's like chasing your shadow. The faster you run after it, the more it eludes you. When you just stop and say, okay, and you walk away, then it follows you. So the question then became in my life, not how can I get what I need? In my case, I thought, if only I can get into medical school, then I'll be happy. And then the more I worried about it, the harder it became to study. And the harder it became to study, the more I worried, it became a vicious cycle, to the point where I couldn't sleep for a week straight, as I mentioned. And I couldn't read a headline on a newspaper and tell you 5 minutes later what it said. My mind was just so racing. So I went from that to, you know, going back to school, graduating first in my class, getting the baccalaureate, going to Harvard. And I say that not to be self-aggrandizing, to say I experienced both ends of that spectrum.
Yeah.
And when I really thought that I had to do well to be a good person and to love myself and love others, I couldn't function. When I said, when I got glimpses that at the end of a meditation, let's say, that I was feeling peaceful, and the Swami would say, the meditation didn't bring you that sense of peace, but at least temporarily you're no longer disturbing what's really your natural state. Then I thought, then the question becomes, it shifts from how can I get what is going to make me happy to how can I stop disturbing what I already have? And that's profoundly empowering, because if I have to get it from outside myself, then everyone who has what I think I need has power over me. If I have it already, then it's profoundly empowering, because then I can say, if I'm starting to feel anxious or stressed or worried or whatever, to say, okay, what am I doing that's keeping me from experiencing that? And I've learned that when we quiet down our mind and body, that we all have this inner Swami, this inner teacher, this inner spiritual advisor, this inner God within, whatever name you want to give to that. It's the one that speaks very clearly but very quietly. It's the one that wakes us up in the middle of the night and says, hey, Dean, listen up, pay attention. You're not doing something that's in your best interest. And so at the end of a meditation, I always ask that little voice, which I've learned to recognize because it gets drowned out by the chatter of everyday life. What am I not paying attention to that I need to listen to? And then just give some space and listen to it. And it's amazing what emerges. And all of the things that we've done over the last 40 years, were thought to be impossible. And we've, knock on wood, they've all worked. And they all come from that place of knowing that we all have and listening to it, and then kind of reverse engineering. Hey, well, if it's really true that we can reverse all these differences, these diseases, how can we set up a scientific study to prove that? So it's incredibly empowering, and it also gave me great compassion on other people's suffering, and it also helped me see that there's meaning and value in suffering, because it gets our attention. Change is hard, as you know. But if I'm in enough pain, or if we're in enough pain, suddenly the idea of change becomes more appealing. It's kind of like, wow, I don't know, meditation and plant-based diet, that's kind of weird stuff, but boy, I'm hurting so much. Let me try this weird stuff.
Yeah.
And that's part of the value of science, is to raise awareness, to say, hey, if you're willing to make these changes, there's a really good chance you're going to get better and quickly. Then people make these changes and they start to feel so much better so quickly. It reframes the reason for making these changes from fear of dying to joy and pleasure and love and feeling good, which are really what makes them sustainable. And I can't tell you how many patients have said things to me like, you know, having a heart attack was the best thing that ever happened to me, or being diagnosed with cancer or whatever. And the first time I heard that, I said, what, are you nuts? And they'd say, no, that's what it took to get my attention to begin doing these things and eating this way and meditating and loving more, that ultimately have transformed my life so much that I probably never would have done that otherwise. And that was certainly true in my life as well.
Nice. Nice.
So that's
Thank
really
you.
become my life's work, and this is really the Trojan horse for talking about what really matters most.
I'm proud of you. You've done some significant research in the area of heart disease, which is our #1 killer of men and women. What were your findings, and can diet really prevent and reverse heart disease?
Well, I began my first study in 1977 when I was a second-year medical student. I took 10 men and women, put them in a hotel for a month, and they got better. And they not only felt better, their chest pain went away in over 90% in just the first few weeks, but they were better in ways we could actually measure. And so we're using these very high-tech, expensive, state-of-the-art scientific measures to prove the power of this very simple and low-tech and low-cost intervention. And we found that the blood flow to the heart improved in 8 of the 10 patients. And most of the patients were able to reduce or get off the medication that they were told they'd have to take for the rest of their life, like medications to lower their cholesterol, their blood pressure, their blood sugar, and so on. But it also was my first experience that when you're doing something that's truly disruptive, because it was thought as impossible to reverse heart disease, it's not always met with universal acceptance. You know, it's very threatening to the order that those paradigms provide. So people say things like, well, you didn't control for the time of day you tested people. And I said, well, that's theoretically true, but whoever does that? Well, that's beside the point, you know, or you didn't have a randomized control group. And I said, well, that's true too, but how often do you see heart disease reversing? Well, that's beside the point, you know. So I said, okay. So I went back to school, finished my medical school, got an MD, then took off another year to do another 1-month study. And this time we did have a randomized control group. And we replicated the earlier findings, and we published that in the Journal of the American Medical Association back in 1983. Went to Boston, to Harvard, to Mass General, did my fellowship, my residency, moved to San Francisco, began the third most definitive study called the Lifestyle Heart Trial. And we again showed, using these state-of-the-art measures, that the amount of blockage in the arteries that feed the heart got less clogged after 1 year and even less clogged after 5 years. Whereas in the randomized comparison group, who were following the American Heart Association diet guidelines and exercising, weren't enough to keep the disease from getting worse. They got worse maybe more slowly, but they still got worse after 1 year and even worse after 5 years. And we published the 1-year findings of that study in The Lancet, the premier international medical journal, and the 5-year findings in the Journal of the American Medical Association and other journals like that. So then we turned our attention to other diseases, and we found that these same lifestyle changes that could reverse heart disease could reverse type 2 diabetes, could reverse high blood pressure, could reverse elevated cholesterol levels, could reverse obesity. We then did the first randomized trial with Peter Carroll, the chair of urology at UCSF, where I'm a professor, and the late Dr. Bill Fair, who at the time was the chairman of urology at Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center. When you're doing something disruptive, it's always good to work with the top people in the field, because then it's more believable and credible. And we found that men with early stage prostate cancer who made these same lifestyle changes could slow, stop, or even reverse the progression of their prostate cancer.
That's one of my questions.
Which was an exciting finding, because there have now been 2 major 10-year trials that showed, both in the New England Journal of Medicine, that men with early stage prostate cancer who did nothing lived as long as those who had surgery or radiation. And yet those treatments often maim guys in the most personal ways, because they can't have sex because they're impotent, or they're wearing diapers because they're incontinent, for no benefit at huge economic and huge personal costs. Now, it turns out that about 1 out of 49 or 50 men actually do benefit from surgery or radiation, who have the most aggressive forms of prostate cancer. But for the other 49 or so, they're better, they don't want to just do nothing, so we can give people a third alternative, which is to make comprehensive changes in diet and lifestyle. We then found that these same lifestyle changes could actually change your gene expression. And we published with Craig Venter, who was the first to decode the human genome, that over 500 genes were changed in just 3 months. In effect, turning on or upregulating the genes that keep us healthy, turning off or downregulating the genes that cause prostate, colon, and breast cancer, heart disease, diabetes, and other chronic conditions. Just, within just a few months, over 500 genes. And then we did a study with Dr. Elizabeth Blackburn, who got the Nobel Prize for her pioneering work with telomeres, which are the ends of our chromosomes that control how long we live. They're a little like the plastic tips on the ends of our shoelaces that keep our shoelace from unraveling. They actually keep our DNA from unraveling. And as we grow older, our telomeres get shorter. And as our telomeres get shorter, our lives get shorter. And the risk of premature death from pretty much everything goes up correspondingly. So we found for the first time that we could actually lengthen telomeres. And when we published this in the Lancet Oncology, the Lancet press release called it reversing aging at a cellular level, which it is. We are now just starting the first randomized trial to see if these same lifestyle changes can reverse early stage Alzheimer's disease, which I'm particularly interested in because my mom died of Alzheimer's, who was brilliant, and it was such a painful tragedy to watch her mind deteriorate in that way. And there are no good treatments either for preventing it or for treating it. So it's a perfect time. I think we're at a place with Alzheimer's disease very similar to where we were with heart disease 40 years ago. There's every reason to think it'll work, but no one's done a randomized trial to prove that, so we'll see. And also, after 16 years of review, Medicare agreed to provide reimbursement for my program. They even created a new benefit category for it called intensive cardiac rehabilitation. So we've been training hospitals and clinics and physician groups around the country. And it's working. We're getting bigger changes in lifestyle, better clinical outcomes, bigger cost savings, and better adherence than anyone's ever shown before. And so we're really helping to create a whole new paradigm of healthcare under what's called lifestyle medicine. And lifestyle medicine is a field that I help create, which is using lifestyle changes not only to help prevent disease, but actually to treat it and often reverse it. Sometimes in combination with drugs and surgery, often as a direct alternative to that. And we're finding that it's working, and we're finding that it's not only medically effective, but it's also cost effective. Highmark Blue Cross Blue Shield found that they cut their overall healthcare costs in half in the first year, and by 400% when they looked at the people that they'd spent at least $25,000 on in the previous year. And Mutual of Omaha found that almost 80% of people that were told they needed to have a stent or a bypass were able to successfully avoid it by changing diet and lifestyle as a direct alternative to that. So it's why I love doing this work, because it's an opportunity for me to work with people who are suffering and show them and empower them with the tools that they can use to transform their lives. So this new book, that I co-wrote with my lovely wife, Anne, who I've worked with for 20 years, is called Undo It. And it's based on the idea that with all this talk about personalized medicine, it wasn't like there was one set of diet and lifestyle changes for reversing heart disease, a different one for reversing prostate cancer or diabetes or high blood pressure or whatever. It was the same for all of these. And the reason is that, and for the same reason why in China and Asia, until 50 or 60 years ago, they had very, very low rates of all these chronic diseases. And yet when they start to eat like us and live like us, they start to die like us. Or when they move to this country, the same thing. So the radical unifying theory that I'm putting forth in this new book is that I was trained as a doctor to view all these diseases, heart disease, as different than prostate cancer, different than diabetes, different than Alzheimer's. But they're really not. They're really different expressions of the same underlying biological mechanisms that get disordered. Things like chronic inflammation, oxidative stress, changes in the microbiome, changes in telomeres and gene expressions and angiogenesis and apoptosis. And all of these mechanisms in turn are directly linked to what we eat, how we respond to stress, how much exercise we get, and how much love and support we have. So to reduce it down to its essence, it's eat well, move more, stress less, love more. Boom, that's it. And so part of what I learned, and the book opens with a quote, one of my favorite quotes by Albert Einstein that says, if you can't make it simple, you don't understand it well enough. And so I'm trying to reduce it down to its essence, to say it's really not that hard, you can do it. And because these underlying biological mechanisms are so dynamic, when you make these changes, to the degree you make them, most people feel so much better so quickly. It reframes the reason for making your changes in lifestyle from fear of dying to joy of living. And it's joy and pleasure and love and feeling good that ultimately make these lifestyle changes sustainable and worth doing. And yeah, you'll probably live longer too, but you know, as you mentioned earlier,
that's a good side effect.
It's a good side effect. The only side effects are good ones.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you know, you mentioned that you were depressed and suicidal when you were younger, just like I was.
Yeah.
And if somebody had told you or me then, hey, you're going to live longer if you just make these changes, you'd probably say something like, you don't get it. I'm just trying to get through the day. I don't know if I want to live longer. Yeah. And when I talk to people in our studies, you know, that's what they share with me. They say, you know, the real epidemic is depression and loneliness and isolation with the breakdown of the social networks that used to give people a sense of love and connection and community. 50 or 60 years ago, most people had an extended family they saw regularly. They had a job that felt secure, that they'd been at for 10 years or more, and they got to know their coworkers. They had a neighborhood with 2 or 3 generations of people who lived together. They had an extended family they saw regularly. They had a church or synagogue they went to regularly. And many people today have none of those. And so what I've learned is that it's not enough to give people health information. If it were, nobody would smoke. It's not like I'd say, hey, I want you to quit smoking. Did you know it's bad for you? They go, I didn't know that. Of course, everybody knows that, but still a lot of people smoke. And I say, well, why do you smoke? They say, because it gets me through the day. I've got 20 friends in this pack of cigarettes, they'll say, and they're always there for me and nobody else is. You're going to take away my 20 friends? What are you going to give me? Or food fills that void, or fat coats my nerves and numbs the pain, or alcohol or opioids numb the pain, or working all the time is a more socially acceptable way of distracting yourself from your pain, or video games is a good way to distract yourself from your pain. And so I've learned that information is important, but it's not usually sufficient. We're drowning in information. With Google, you can look up anything in a fraction of a second. And focusing on behaviors is important, but it's not usually sufficient. But if we focus on the deeper issues, the loneliness and isolation, depression, then we find that people are much more likely to make and maintain lifestyle choices that are life-enhancing than ones that are self-destructive.
Next question, can a whole food plant-based diet help with Parkinson's disease?
We don't know. There's some anecdotal case reports that it can, just like there are anecdotal case reports that a whole foods plant-based diet can help with multiple sclerosis and Alzheimer's disease. And that's why we're doing the randomized trial, to see whether these same lifestyle changes, not just the diet, that's one part of it, but also the stress less, the move more, and the love more, can reverse the progression of early stage Alzheimer's. And if we can show that, then I think the next things that we'll be looking at will be things like Parkinson's and multiple sclerosis and related diseases, because they share many of the same underlying biological mechanisms, which in turn are directly influenced by what we eat, how we respond to stress, how much exercise we get, and how much love and support we have.
What about turmeric for Alzheimer's and dementia? Is that a specific food that you've seen to decrease inflammation, help specifically with maybe even some of the symptoms of dementia and Alzheimer's or the progression? Yeah,
turmeric, which is curcumin, is a spice that's used in curries, and it has powerful anti-inflammatory properties, especially if you take it with black pepper. It absorbs much faster then. And because it has anti-inflammatory properties, and because inflammation is one of the underlying causes of Alzheimer's and other causes of dementia, turmeric or curcumin on a regular basis has been shown to reduce the incidence of dementia. But then again, the omega-3 fatty acids have been shown to reduce Alzheimer's by 60%. People who just a diet that's high in fruits and vegetables can reduce it by 30 to 40%. Now, this is in the context of knowing that there are no good drugs for treating or preventing Alzheimer's. And I can assure you that if a new drug came out that said can help prevent 60% of Alzheimer's in people who are high risk, it would be, you can't watch TV without ask your doctor about this new miracle drug, and yet it's just the omega-3 fatty acids. So we're learning that these simple changes that we can make in our lives can make a powerful difference.
So many of us have thought, including me, that we do not grow new brain cells, that we only lose them. But in your book, The Spectrum, you mentioned a group of people who walked 3 hours a week for 3 months actually made their brains bigger, specifically the hippocampus. Can our brains really produce new neurons and replace ones that were damaged or malfunctioned?
Yes. When I was in medical school, we were taught that you just got a certain number of brain cells, and if you went out a couple of six-packs and killed off a few thousand, you never get them back. The good news is that all of the mechanisms in our body are so much more dynamic than we had once realized, and especially our brain. And one study showed that you mentioned that just walking for a half an hour a day over a 3-month period caused so much neurogenesis or new growth of brain cells that people's hippocampus, their brain got measurably bigger. And that was thought impossible just 10 or 15 years ago. And the hippocampus is particularly important because, as you say, that's what controls memory. And so a lot of the things that happen as people get older, like, what was that person's name and where did I leave my keys, that we tend to think of as a natural part of getting older, really may be unnatural. And the same kinds of changes, not only exercise, but changes in what we eat, how we respond to stress, exercise, and how much love and support, all seem to have a powerful influence on Alzheimer's disease and other causes of dementia as well.
So we can actually grow more neurons in our brains. We can grow new brain cells.
Grow more neurons in our brain. And even, these mechanisms are so dynamic. There was a film that James Cameron did with Luis Hoyos that will come out in the next few months called Game Changers.
I've seen it.
And James Cameron is a legendary filmmaker who did, Titanic and Avatar and all these great, Terminator, all these great movies.
Him and his wife are plant-based.
And he and his wife are plant-based. Susie, in fact, I wrote the foreword to Susie's new book. And they became plant-based originally because of their concern. They're ardent, he's an explorer, and they're ardent environmentalists. And when he learned that more global warming was caused by eating livestock than all forms of transportation combined, he went on a plant-based vegan diet. And then he began to feel so much better. I visited their studio set last month. He's actually making avatars 2, 3, 4 at the same time. That's how much energy he has. Then it really changed their lives. And so he had decided that he would make this documentary with Luis Hoyos. He did this brilliant documentary called The Cove, which got an Academy Award. His first documentary got an Academy Award. That's how brilliant this guy is. In fact, he's actually filming our Alzheimer's study all the way through, which is great. But the Game Changers is about really elite athletes, because the biggest misconceptions about eating a whole foods plant-based diet are that you're kind of a wimp and you don't get enough protein. And so by having all these elite athletes who raised their game, who became national mixed martial artist champions and heavyweight boxers and Olympic athletes and pro football players and so on, I think will really be a game changer. But there's this one great scene in the movie where, Robert Vogel has done a lot of interesting work showing that even a single meal can reduce blood flow to your brain. And people say, but there's a great scene in there with a urologist named Aaron Spitz, and they have these 3 elite athletes in their mid-20s. And he feeds them first a meat-based meal, and then they have this device that measures the frequency and duration of erections they have at night. Have you seen this? Have you seen this clip?
I've seen the documentary.
You say you saw it, then say you know.
Yeah,
it's great.
It's so good. If the documentary was just that scene, it would do so well.
Well, apparently the film crew became vegan after shooting it. But,
I love it.
So basically what they found was that they gave them a meat-based meal, and they measured how frequently, how hard their erections were that night when they slept. And then they gave them a plant-based meal. And it was and by the way, the meat was organic, grass-fed beef, those kinds of things. And then they gave them a plant-based meal, and they repeated the same thing the next night. And they found they had 300 to 500% more frequent erections and 10 to 15% harder from one meal.
Yeah.
Your brain gets more blood, you think more clearly, you have more energy, you need less sleep, you can function better. Your brain, as we've talked about, your brain grows so many new brain cells, your brain gets bigger, your skin gets more blood, so you look 10 or 15, 20 years younger. I'm 96, I look pretty good, I think. Your heart gets more blood, your sexual organs get more blood. So in all the ways that matter most, we're so much more dynamic and you can experience these changes in hours, not years. And so then it becomes an equation like, what I gain is so much more than what I give up. Yeah, I like eating cheeseburgers, but boy, I like having sex even better.
Exactly.
Or gosh, I like not having chest pain anymore. And I can make love with my spouse, and I can walk across the street, and I can go back to work, I can play with my kids, I can all the things that make life fun and meaningful. Those are choices worth making.
Yeah. Okay, next question. You say in your book that 50% of men who smoke cigarettes are impotent. If so, why specifically? And can quitting and eating a plant-based diet reverse bodily damage from smoking?
Yeah, it's the same principle. Nicotine makes your arteries constrict. So it's like the anti-Viagra. So in your face, it makes you wrinkle faster. In fact, Christy Turlington, the supermodel, has a wonderful website called smokingisugly.com because her father died of lung cancer. And she said, if you talk about smoking is bad for you. Everybody knows that. It's too scary to think that something bad will happen, so people don't want to think about it. But if you say smoking makes you ugly because it makes your skin look 10 to 20 years older because the blood constricts and so you get wrinkles and you get that gray pallor, well, that's a different thing, and the same is true why guys are impotent, because it constricts blood flow to your penis. And why smoking causes heart attacks, because it constricts the blood flow to your heart. So when you change things, there are studies that have shown that people who quit smoking within a year or so, their risk of getting heart attacks is as low as if they'd never smoked. So you can get better quickly, you can get worse quickly, within hours in some cases, and certainly within days to weeks. And so part of what we've learned is that, and the book I wrote earlier called The Spectrum was based on the finding that in all of our studies, the more you change, the more you improve, and the better you feel in every way we can measure, at any age. I had thought that the younger people with less severe disease would do better, but I was wrong. It wasn't how old they were, it wasn't how sick they were. It was simply a function of the more you change your diet and lifestyle, the more you improve at any age, which is a great message to be able to give people.
Yeah.
And that's why I love what you're doing, because to me, awareness is always the first step in healing. And so when people watch this and hopefully can be inspired to make these changes, and they start to do it, And ironically, you can either sort of ease your way into it, which is what the Spectrum book was about, or you can make really big changes all at once. And sometimes, actually, paradoxically, it's easier to make big changes all at once, because when you make big changes, you feel so much better so quickly, especially if you have angina or other things like that, and you can see from your own experience how much better you feel, then it becomes worth doing, again, because it refrains from doing it to prevent something bad from happening years down the road, to saying, oh, my quality of life is so much better. These are choices worth making, not to live longer, but to feel better.
What are your thoughts on alcohol? Can people just get the same benefits of wine from non-fermented wine juice, which is grape juice? Or just the whole grape, even better?
The grape is, it turns out that there were so many studies, it's become almost a meme. It actually has become a meme, that people who drink moderately live longer than those who don't drink at all or who drink more than 2 glasses a day. But there was a major review article that came out in The Lancet, the premier international medical journal, a few months ago, that actually reviewed those data. What they found was that it was an artifact, that the people who didn't drink at all didn't live as long as those who had 1 or 2 drinks a day, because often the reason they didn't drink at all is because they were sick. And they didn't want any alcohol because they had chronic diseases. So if you control for that, it actually, every drink that you have increases your risk of getting sick. Now, that doesn't mean you should never drink, but don't kid yourself. Don't start drinking to think because it's going to make you healthier. And the polyphenols and the flavonols and all the things that you find in the grapes are really what provide the benefit. And actually, I also think that the reason why people who drink 1 or 2 drinks a day were found to live longer is because who are the people who drink 1 or 2 drinks a day? What are they doing? They're usually, it's happy hour. I'm like, let's have a drink together. Let's sit down, let's unwind, let's be with our social support. And I wrote a book years ago called Love and Survival that reviewed what were then hundreds and now tens of thousands of studies, that people who are lonely and depressed are 3 to 10 times more likely to get sick and die prematurely from pretty much everything when compared to those who have a sense of love and connection and community. I don't know anything in medicine that has that kind of power of impact. So if you want to hang out with your friends and have some grape juice, that's going to give you the benefits without the...
What about like the CBD oils? How much more does that affect us than a whole food plant-based diet? Can we get the same effects, or does it give us something super special?
Well, the CBD can help to reduce inflammation, but sugar and fat and animal protein especially can cause inflammation. So you may not need the CBD if you're doing all these other things, but since most people are not eating a perfect diet, then those things can be helpful at times. Okay.
And what are your thoughts on saunas and steam baths? Are they helpful or harmful?
Saunas and steam baths and exercise in general make you sweat, most things that are worth doing make you sweat, And so to that extent, it can be helpful, but also because that's how your body detoxifies itself through your urination and your feces, but also your skin is your largest organ. And so anything that helps you eliminate things can be useful. Now, obviously, if you have heart disease, you have to be careful not to spend too much time in a sauna or steam bath, because it brings blood to the surface of your skin, which can often divert it from your heart, which in a healthy person is not a big deal, but in someone who's barely getting enough blood flow can be a problem.
Okay.
And for the same reason, intermittent fasting helps you get better fast as well, because it allows your body to detoxify and get rid of what's already there, as opposed to continually putting stuff in. And one of the easiest ways to do that is just to have a really light dinner and try not to eat very late. So if you don't eat, say, past 6 or 6:30, and you don't have breakfast until 8 or 10 hours later, then you're kind of getting an intermittent fast, and your sleep will be that much more powerful as well, because instead of trying to process food, your body is actually being able to heal and detoxify. And it's one of the reasons why sleep deprivation is so strongly linked with Alzheimer's, because that's how your brain detoxifies, is when you're sleeping.
I love my sleep. Okay, the last question. How would you encourage people to eat and adopt a healthy lifestyle? As you say, how can we turn the fear of dying into the joy of living?
It goes back to what we talked about earlier. There's no point in giving up something that you enjoy unless you get something back that's better and quickly. And because these underlying biological mechanisms we've been talking about are so dynamic, to the degree that you change your diet and lifestyle, you're likely to feel so much better so quickly in ways that really matter. Then it reframes the reason for changing them from fear of dying or fear of something bad happening to joy and pleasure and love and feeling good. And that's ultimately what makes these sustainable. And so I would and you can do it in one of two ways. One is small, gradual changes, to the degree that you make these changes, you're going to feel better. So have a meatless Monday, which, by the way, will help the planet. And also, it turns out that it takes 14 times more resources to make a pound of meat-based protein than plant-based protein. We have enough food to feed everybody. No one need go hungry. I was the board of the San Francisco Food Bank. I was shocked to find that 1 out of 5 people in the Bay Area goes to bed hungry every night. It's pitiful. It's inexcusable. And we can actually do something about it. You know, it's so easy to feel overwhelmed, like what can I as one person do to make a difference with global warming or feeding the hungry? And when you realize that something as primal as what you put in your mouth every day can make a difference not only in your life and your family's life, but freeing up resources to feed the hungry and to help prevent and reverse global warming, it imbues those choices with meaning. And if it's meaningful, then it's sustainable. You know, for the same reason, all spiritual traditions talk about being monogamous. Well, that can be also like, oh, you know, you're bad if you have sex with anyone other than your spouse, and it turns into this whole moral issue. Or it's like, oh, when I choose not to do something that I otherwise could do, not eat, I mean, all spiritual traditions have dietary guidelines, and they're all different from each other. But I think that whatever the intrinsic benefit is of eating or not eating certain foods, just the act of choosing not to do something that you otherwise could do, not to eat certain foods or to have sex with only one person, imbues those choices with meaning, and what you gain is so much more than what you give up. Instead of like digging a lot of shallow wells and never reaching water, you dig one deep one and you reach the wellspring. And so my wife and lover, who happens to be my lover, it's nice when you have them both in the same person.
She's a supermodel, by the way.
No, she's not. She just looks like one, and she's as smart as she is beautiful. We keep having these infinitely variable experiences, even though we're in the same bodies, because we try to, whenever we have a date, to approach it not to recreate something, to be imitative, but to be open to all possibilities and all degrees of freedom. And you can only be intimate with someone to the degree you feel safe to open your heart and be vulnerable emotionally to them. And you can only and so the more committed you are, the more safe you are, the more open your heart can be, and the more open and intimate you are, the more erotic it becomes. And that was something I never knew before. And so rather than having the same kind of experience with different people, we have these infinitely erotic and variable and infinitely variable experiences with the same person.
Yeah.
That's so far beyond anything I've ever imagined, much less experienced, that it's like, okay, yeah, it'd be fun to have sex with different people, but I know I couldn't have these experiences that I'm having if I did that.
Right.
Just like I knew, yeah, it'd be fun to eat cheeseburgers. I grew up in Texas eating meat all the time, but boy, I wouldn't be able to feel the way that I do if I did that. So what I gain is so much more than what I give up, and it's pleasure that makes it sustainable. You know, it's not out of fear or judgment or guilt, but rather it's joy and pleasure and freedom that ultimately make it worth doing. Because what you gain is so much more than what you give up.
It's so true. That's so true. Wow, you're really special.
Thank you. Right back at you.
Thanks so much for watching. Love, Gianna.
And love from Dr. Dean Ornish as well.